Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tell Me About Podcast, where every week two nerdy friends deep dive random topics. I'm Laura,
And I'm Tom.
and this is episode 3. Today, we're talking about TLC's problematic shows. I have a lot to say about this topic, so settle in for this one. This will likely be a two-part episode, so hang in with us. We'll do the first part this week, and we'll release part 2 next week. So I know that I said last week that this episode would be a bit lighter, but after writing it, it's definitely not. So I do want to note a trigger warning. This episode contains mention of physical and sexual abuse, CSAM, violence, mental health, and addiction. Now, before we dive in, we want to thank everyone who listened to our first 2 episodes, and we are so grateful for everyone who listened, and we want to hopefully continue to grow our audience. So please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can reach more people. And now we are officially uploaded on all of the big streaming platforms, so you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. So Tom, do you want to add anything?
So I wanted to thank everyone who reached out about the first 2 episodes. We really appreciate you listening. I have a bit of a follow up on episode 2. We'll get to that later on in the show.
All right. Sounds
That's
good.
called a tease.
All the T's. Okay. So, Tom, I know that you're not a big reality TV person, but have you watched any reality shows recently? Do you know any shows on TLC? What do you know about this topic so far?
I've heard of things like, for example, I heard of what was it, the John and Kate
Let's say,
show.
oh yeah, we're gonna cover that. There's a lot to talk
Um,
about in that one. Yeah.
where was TLC the Duggars too?
Yep, they're on my list.
Oh, and then of course there's these. It's not the reality show, but there's the Sex Sent Me to the ER show.
Yes, I did not cover that one. But yeah, definitely that was an interesting show. I've seen clips of that before, but yes, that's an interesting one. All right, let's get started with this week's topic. So, I wanted to talk about this topic because not only have I watched many of these shows, but I feel like there's a pattern of problematic messages sent to the TLC audience. And some people involved in these shows have had some really problematic behaviors before, during, and after the shows air. So, a couple things I want us to keep in mind as we go through the show. I want us to think about, like, is this a pattern for TLC or is this just the nature of reality TV? How much is TLC complicit in some of these scandals? And you're going to see sometimes they possibly knew things, sometimes they were involved. And my last question more generally is, why can't we look away from a train wreck? Some of these shows, these characters are very chaotic, and I like I said, have seen some of these shows, have fully been into them, so I'm part of this too, and it just seems fascinating the more chaotic it is. So I definitely want to hear your feedback. I want to hear the audience feedback on this, but we'll get to more of our thoughts on that in a bit. First, I want to start by giving a brief history of TLC. TLC, formerly known as the Learning Channel and now owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, was created in 1980 as a cable channel for educational and instructional programming. It was originally owned by a nonprofit company called ACSN before being acquired by the Disney Channel in 1991. It continued educational programming and began airing more personal story shows such as Trading Spaces, A Wedding Story, A Baby Story. I was all into those. Trading Spaces was great. If anybody has watched that, let us know. Audiences connected with these personal stories, and the channel transitioned into reality TV, essentially, in the late 1990s. And in the early 2000s, the channel featured less mainstream families and topics, and the Learning Channel was eventually phased out of its name and is only known today as TLC. Now, from my recollection, when the channel started, I believe they really aimed to show audiences like different lifestyles and families, like in an effort to educate them and promote inclusiveness. And this was in an age where the internet and social media was largely in its infancy, and social media didn't really exist at all back then. At some point, the channel really went off the rails, so to speak, with the families and the topics that they aired, and we'll definitely get to that. Before certain shows went to series, documentaries were made to test audience reactions, and a lot of the time airing on Discovery Health. If the audiences liked the family or topic enough, a series was launched. So the first show that we're going to talk about is, as you alluded to, is 19 Kids and Counting, which later produced a spinoff called Counting On. Now, the Duggar family from Northwest Arkansas was first showcased on several documentaries on Discovery Health, including 14 Children and Pregnant Again in 2004, and then Raising 16 Children, 16 Children and Moving In, and On the Road with 16 Children in 2006. So it seems like 2006 was a very busy year for them. A TV series was greenlit for the family, and 17 Kids and Counting premiered in 2008 and then last aired as 19 Kids and Counting in 2015. The series spinoff, as mentioned, Counting On, premiered in 2015 and last aired in 2021. And these dates are going to be important later. So featuring parents, Jim, Bob, and Michelle, and their brood of all kids with J names. I did write them out, but I didn't want to take the time to say them all. This show followed this large family of Christian fundamentalists who follow the teachings of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or the IBLP. One of the principles is for couples to let God determine how many children they have, and they don't allow the use of birth control, hence so many children. The show focused on the family and their religion and filmed the family in different situations and circumstances that often made them look out of touch with normal society and highlighted their severe lack of cultural awareness. How the family raised so many children and managed the households became a real draw for audiences, though it quickly became obvious, even in the early documentaries, that the older Duggar daughters do most of the work maintaining the household and raising the kids. The kids had jurisdictions, as they called it, assigned to them. So essentially chores around the house, laundry, cooking, stuff like that. And the boys did help a bit, but these jurisdictions around housework were largely done by the girls. And you can just really see the difference between the two genders and what the expectations were for each.
One thing that I think we're going to see from this, and you can tell us a lot more, is that TLC likes to show train wrecks.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is only the first one.
Yeah.
And that's the point of this. Like, I want to know, like, I mean, clearly they make a ton of money off this stuff and their shows are very popular. But like, I guess I kind of want to know the psychology behind it. Like, why are we so intrigued by this? Like, why are we so drawn into this? But like I said, I have some theories that we'll get to. So back to the Duggar family. The Duggars also proudly discuss what they call their buddy system, where once a child is no longer nursing, the child gets assigned to an older daughter to be their responsibility. And my thought is on that is, at what point do you stop having children because your other children have to raise them? And you can kind of see, I've actually never seen a full episode of the show. I've seen a lot of clips and know a lot of what goes on in the family. And I saw this clip where Michelle is talking about her kids, and like as the kids go on and the younger they get, the less she knows about them. And it's so sad. They also talk about their religious beliefs. And so the audience knows, neither one of us are here to judge anybody's religion. We're strictly focusing on these families on TLC. So some of their religious principles discussed on the show include this patriarchal structure and what they call an umbrella of authority. So it's essentially God, and then men, and then women, and then the children. So women essentially belong to their fathers and then their husbands after they get married. They talk a lot about how women's role is just to be wives and mothers, and they're discouraged from working and furthering their education. They're told that they cannot wear pants because they have to be super modest. And they also homeschool their children a lot, which, again, nothing wrong with homeschooling. If you can do it, that's more power to you. But I think the way they structured their homeschooling, it was very religious based, and they focused on these religion booklets that pretty much just taught about the principles of the religion and this very sexist patriarchal structure. They also were not allowed to watch TV, and they also had very limited internet. Now, a huge part of the show, as a lot of the teenagers grew up and got married, they talked about courting rituals. A father must approve of who a daughter is courting, And on the show, they openly discuss how Jim Bob has this like 50-page questionnaire that the sons have to fill out before they're allowed to court one of his daughters. That just seems so intrusive.
It all just seems like the kids to them are just status symbols.
Yes.
They're trophies. And nothing, they're not human beings. They're just trophies and status symbols the way like an armoire would be.
Exactly. And their beliefs are based on what they call this quiverful movement. So you essentially are supposed to build this army for God by having as many children as possible. Now, they don't specifically use that particular phrase on the show, but that's pretty much what it is. And yeah, it's again, you're not nourishing your kids. You're not forming that close bond with them. And then again, one of my questions with some of these shows is what impact does that have on the kids? Not only being in this family, but having the publicity on top of it, you know? So going back to the courting rituals, they're also only allowed to side hug each other before they get engaged. And then once engaged, they can only hold hands. So the first kiss and sex has to wait until marriage. Now,
the side hug, they're out here stealing my moves.
So the IVLP, founded by Bill Gothard, his goal initially was to help thwart the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s. And it's certainly seen by a cult that, in part, promotes and covers up abuse. And the Duggars are absolutely complicit in promoting that abuse. They recommend this book, which is ILB approved, called To Train Up a Child. And that talks about this concept of blanket training, where a parent essentially breaks the will of a child by hitting them if they move off of a blanket to reach for a toy. Like, how sad is that? That's just, they again, such an early age, you're like I said, essentially breaking their will and breaking their spirit. So you can train them and that they are obedient to you. And the Duggars use the word obedient quite a bit when it comes to their children, almost like their dogs. And they should not be treated like that. Another hallmark of the show, of anybody that's seen it, are these numerous gross, tight-lipped kissing scenes between Jim Bob and Michelle. If you know, you know. And Jim Bob essentially taunts the kids that he can do this because he's married, but they can't. And it's just, there's so many super cringy moments in the show. You really tend to feel bad for the kids, especially the girls who are overburdened by their parents' choices. And like I said, they just weren't able to be kids. Now, while some of the audience certainly felt a cringe factor and disapproved of such a patriarchal structure, the biggest scandals essentially came from the eldest son, Josh. The first one occurred before the show. In 2006, the family was set to go on the Oprah show to promote one of the early documentaries. And before their appearance, Oprah's staff received a letter informing them that Josh had sexually abused some of his sisters, and the family weren't what they portrayed themselves to be. The authorities were notified, and the appearance was canceled. An investigation was launched, but essentially went nowhere. Nothing was heard publicly about this until 2015, when the story finally did come out. It's unknown what, if anything, TLC knew about this prior to launching the TV series, but they pursued it nonetheless. In response, the family, in two separate interviews, Jim Bob and Michelle, and then two of the older daughters who were victims, Jill and Jessa, gave very separate, really gross interviews on the Megyn Kelly show, and they basically downplayed Josh's actions and defended him to some degree. I can't even watch it. I've seen clips of it, and it just makes me so sick that they're defending this monster. Even now, we'll get to it in a minute. Everything else that came out about him, it's really fucked up. Now, Jill, the one daughter that participated, now states that she felt pressured to do the interview to save the show, and she absolutely regrets doing it. So I'm glad to hear that she said that. Now, TLC executives could not move past this scandal, and they canceled the show in 2015. Jim Bob, though, was desperate to keep the cash flowing, and TLC agreed to launch Counting On, following older daughters Jill and Jessa as they started their own families. Josh, however, was soon back in the news. Also in 2015, as a part of the Ashley Madison data breach, which a lot of us know what that is. It's essentially a website where spouses go to cheat on their spouses. So Josh was exposed to having two different accounts and was a paying member for about 5 years. By this time, he was married to his wife, Anna, since 2008. He publicly released a pathetic apology, and life moved on for him. Counting On continued with no major scandals as more of the kids got married and started their own lives. The show ran until 2021 when Josh was yet in trouble again. In May of 2021, Josh was arrested for CSAM charges and later convicted in December. He was sentenced to 12 and a half years in federal prison and will likely serve only about 10 years. His recent appeal to overturn his conviction was denied on August 7th. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the trial. It's really, really disturbing. There are plenty of YouTube channels that cover it. Since then, two of the daughters have been more vocal in their opposition to the IBLP belief system, and one goes even further to acknowledge the abuses from their parents and from Josh. And it recently came to light that the kids allegedly never got paid for most of their appearance on the show, including filmed births of their children. So essentially they filmed, Jill, I think it was, filmed her own birth of her child and never got paid for it. Like, that is such an intimate moment. And I think it was either her first or second, I'm not sure. And to not even get paid, Jim Bob just took all the money, and who knows what the hell he did with it, you know?
Well, and that seems to be a theme recently, if you've been following the Blindside story.
I haven't. I have not. I saw a lot of headlines about it.
And that seems to be a theme of older white people stealing money.
So the documentary, Shiny Happy People, on Amazon dives into the abuses of the IBLP and how the Duggars fooled everyone by protecting Josh and promoting a harmful religious cult. What's infuriating to me is how this family espouses Christian values while hiding and lying about their own family secrets and greed. And the parents and some of the kids have this like condescending attitude about premarital sex, public school, birth control, LGBT, essentially anybody different from them. And compounded by the abuses endured as a result of their religion, living through these scandals in a very public way must have been really difficult for the kids, especially the girls. Several of the sisters who were Josh's victims have stated that they wish this had never become public, and my heart absolutely breaks for them.
So I guess my question is, did TLC approach them to be on TV, or did they approach TLC?
So the way I remember the story of how they got into the documentaries was Jim Bob actually used to serve in I think it was the Arkansas State Senate, if I'm not mistaken. And one election day, a cameraman caught him and Michelle, and let's say there was 10, 11 of their kids at the time, on camera and posted in the newspaper. So I think some TLC execs saw this picture and reached out and contacted them and say, "Hey, do you want to do a documentary about your large family?" And from there, it's history. If I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that that's how they got discovered.
Everything you said about the family to this point, or at least the people who are in charge of making decisions at this point, or the people with the autonomy to make decisions, seems like they're the ones that are searching out the spotlight.
And like I said, I think because it blew up and became so popular so fast, I think that may have kind of let TLC executives like kind of bypass, okay, maybe this isn't the best religion they could be promoting. But I think it was a fascinating, so we've never seen a family like this on TV prior, so I think that was a big draw for them. But yeah, you'll see that it does become a lot more about the money to them than actually making sure that, the kids are taken care of, and, it's actually a positive message that they're sending. But again, maybe that's not the point.
Well, and I think with reality TV, even, quote unquote reality TV is still very heavily produced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And two things that I think that are really interesting in one to the larger conversation as a whole, but one also kind of related to this. The one is I would encourage everyone to go watch or go read up about the efforts to unionize reality TV participants, reality TV producers, reality TV crew members. You kind of get a backstage glimpse as to how controlled and how kind of manipulated the quote unquote reality is.
Yeah. And we'll see this with one of our later shows, how it became apparent very quickly that they were hiding things and that they were essentially super, super scripted and planned how this would go. Yeah. So I think you're 100% right about that. And it's really a false, they're putting out a false picture of what this actually is. But again, is that just reality TV? You know, that's what they need to do to make it popular.
Like I said, I know this is it's completely different than a lot of other reality TV, but it would not surprise me that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think reality TV is about they're trying to argue that they're showing the drama, but really what they're showing is manufactured drama with people that they don't have to pay that much.
But I also feel like with the context of this show that they were selling like wholesome family values and, you know, look at this huge family and then they all get along and love each other, you know, such good kids. And it's like, but that's not what this is, you know?
No, and what they're selling is the ideal that people think about when they think of family.
Mm-hmm.
That's you're not selling reality, you're selling an ideal. You're selling the Norman Rockwell dinner portrait
Mm-hmm.
and the Saturday Evening Post. That's what you're selling. That idea of, you know, the quote unquote American family. That's what
Mm-hmm.
you're selling.
Yeah. Agreed.
And you know, the other thing too, you mentioned about the kind of, I guess, the sect of Christianity that they were promoting and or you know, beholden to. Jason Kirk is a great college football writer. He does a lot of podcasts, but he also writes very candidly about what it was like for him growing up in a evangelical Southern Christian household
Mm-hmm.
as a kid, and what
I
it
bet
kind of
that's fascinating.
it's very, and if you ever have a chance to read his work, it's incredibly fascinating to see basically what it was like for him growing up in that environment. And he recently wrote about, I want to make sure I get the story right. He recently wrote about you know, having an event at a church one night where, you know, actors came in with fake guns, holding, you know, quote unquote, holding the pastor at gunpoint and basically, you know, asking, are they willing to die for Jesus?
Oh my God. How traumatizing is that?
Yeah, and well, that's the whole point. Was he relates that he, you know, told this story on a podcast, and his co-host that he's known for years kind of looked at him with bewilderment. I can link the piece, but basically, it wasn't until he basically thought about it a couple of years ago they realized how traumatizing it was,
Mm-hmm.
and how not normal it was. You know, it's
No,
completely different,
that absolutely ties into this.
but it
Yep.
ties into basically this idea, you know, for lack of a better term, American brand evangelical Christianity, and what it's oftentimes used as almost a mask for.
Oh, absolutely. So once we're finished kind of reviewing each show, I kind of want to look at, is it a train wreck? Is TLC complicit, or is it a combination? I certainly think this show is a train wreck in how it elevated the family that was out of touch, judgmental, a complete circus of literal kids raising kids. I also feel TLC was complicit in continuing to promote a family with a problematic belief system and a son who was a predator. Again, they didn't have to create the spinoff when all the shit hit the fan in 2015, but they did. Again, how much did TLC know about what happened and what Josh did prior to starting the show?
Well, and I think what it comes down to is, I think what you're going to see is that it's kind of part of both.
Mm-hmm.
It's TLC kind of, whether they knew or not, it's them profiting from people wanting to see a train wreck,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to kind of gawk at it,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to gawk at the absurdity of it all. Whether or not they knew, no one comes out of this with their hands clean, or no one should anyway.
And my question is, how could they not know? Like, they Did they find out about the investigation? Did an Oprah staff member reach out to them at all, to the network? Or did they wait until this was investigated and nothing was done and they figured, okay, it was unfounded, let's move on with good intentions? I don't know. Or maybe it's somewhere in between.
I never am going to give a corporation the benefit of the doubt.
I know how you feel about
And
corporations. That's why I thought you'd like this one.
and the people who in a positions of power who let that who can continue to let this family on the air, they're the ones that are going to have to live with that.
I don't think they care though. Like, I think that's
Well,
part of the
and
problem.
I think that also gets to the whole kind of corporate culture that we have here. It's all over the world, but it's magnified to such an extent here that everything is fair game in when it comes to profits
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to the bottom line, and
Which is sad.
which is very sad, and that's how people get hurt
Mm-hmm.
when you're beholden to profits, and when I won't pontificate, but when you're beholden to profits, that's when things like this happen.
Yeah. And I think that's why this did happen. But, in part. Now, I do want to give some recommendations for the Duggar family and 19 Kids and Counting about their story, not necessarily to help them at all. But Shiny Happy People, as I mentioned, it's a recent documentary on Amazon Prime. It's really, really good. Recommend that. Actually, Jill Duggar does have a book coming out in September called Counting the Cost. And I think she's really going to reflect on the abuses of her family and her religion. And she's definitely, come to a different conclusion than when she was growing up. So that's good to see. Also, have to shout out the Duggar Snark community on Reddit. They are incredible. Go check them out too. And Digging Up the Duggars podcast. Whitney and Tim are hilarious. It's a recap podcast, and Whitney does a deep dive on a topic that's related to the episode, and they are great. They really have gained in popularity, and I love them so much. So go check them out. So the next show I want to discuss is, as you had mentioned as well, John and Kate Plus 8, which premiered in 2007 and last aired in 2009. And then Kate Plus 8 premiered in 2010 to 2011 and then again aired 2015 to 2017. So these are TLC's top two biggest, most infamous shows. And, we'll see why as we get into this one as well. So the Gosselin family from Southeast Pennsylvania gained media attention when Kate became pregnant with sextuplets after struggling with infertility. Parents John and Kate struggled quite a bit to provide financially and physically for their kids, twins Maddie and Kara, and then sextuplets, Aiden, Joel, Colin, Alexis, Leah, and Hannah. A TV producer supposedly approached them with the idea of this documentary about their large family after the sextuplets were born. As with 19 Kids and Counting, documentaries about the Gosselin family led to a series on TLC. Also similar to the Duggars, the show followed the family through their day-to-day lives and doing kid-friendly outings while highlighting the challenges of raising that many little ones of the same age. From the beginning, the stress was apparent, as was the toxic dynamic of John and Kate's relationship. Kate was very controlling, insulting, demeaning, and at times she was verbally abusive to John on camera during the day-to-day filming and in their confessionals. So imagine how she was off camera. She would nitpick everything that he did. They would bicker frequently. And it's funny that Kate is now considered the first Karen personality type, and she definitely has the hairstyle as well. The Karen hairstyle is modeled off Kate Gosselin. But there's clips of her like screaming at him when they're shopping in a store, telling him he needed to lose weight constantly, telling him how to parent, and even how to talk. So I remember I was around 22 at the time when this first came out. And even I remember thinking like how abusive and terrible to John she was. Like it's again, super cringy. And what likely compounded the stress was the filming that was almost constant. There were 90 episodes in a little less than 2 years. That's an insane amount of filming and an insane amount of episodes. Now, to no one's surprise, John and Kate separated and divorced, though for a while on the show, they were portrayed to still be married and living together. Allegedly, Kate proposed a deal. It's unknown if TLC was involved. She proposed a deal with John at the time to sign this contract and pretend that they were married and continue the show, but behind closed doors, he could date whoever he wanted. Now, John declined the offer, and a contentious divorce played out in the media and on the show. There were cheating rumors. It was rampant on both sides. Kate with her bodyguard and John with the babysitter. John admittedly, self-awareness, I appreciate that he acted like a teenager at the time, and he was completely unburdened from Kate and the chaos of having 8 children. He had several tumultuous relationships after Kate that also played out in the media and did not make him look great. For TLC's part, they sued John for breach of contract when he left the show, and they rebranded the show Kate Plus 8. Eventually, they settled the lawsuit with John, and he allegedly had a 10-year gag order where he wasn't allowed to talk about the show publicly. So he got quiet for quite a while. Kate Plus 8 aired 2010 to 2011 when production was halted when John filed motions in court to prevent the filming of their kids, and that filming could only happen under very specific conditions that Kate didn't seem to want to comply to. In the meantime, Kate stayed in the public eye by going on Dancing with the Stars, Celebrity Wife Swap, and briefly co-hosted The View. Kate Plus 8 came back in 2015 and aired for another 2 years. She was portrayed as the strict and controlling mother, as usual. One thing was a little off, though, this time. One of the sextuplets, Colin, was missing with no explanation. It was later found that Colin was institutionalized for what Kate calls violent and threatening behavior and multiple psychiatric diagnoses. Colin says he didn't want to film the show, and his mom essentially got rid of him for not cooperating. I don't want to speculate on anybody's mental health, but it's largely believed that Colin did not have the psychiatric disorders that Kate says that he does. She also noted in a journal that later became public that she was physically abusive toward him on multiple occasions, and she struggled with connecting with him since the time he was born. For a while, John didn't know where his son was, and Kate wouldn't tell anyone. In 2018, John finally got Colin released from the institution and was awarded sole custody of him. Their daughter, Hannah, also came to live with John, in part because of her concern about Colin. Now, Kate Plus 8 was canceled in 2017 when Kate was in violation of yet another court order when she wasn't complying with the conditions under which her children were to be filmed. Kate soon moved to North Carolina and supposedly went back to being a nurse. That's something I heard. I cannot verify that. And that was the occupation she had prior to having sextuplets. Today, the twins are in college and the sextuplets just graduated high school. Colin and Hannah recently participated in a documentary called Dark Side of the 2000s, where they discuss the show and their relationship with their mother. Colin maintains that she was abusive and isolated him because he didn't want to film. And Kate released a statement in response that was very cold and self-serving. She hasn't seen Colin since the 6th grade.
The Dark Side of the 2000s episode, I just watched that a little while ago. It's very good. I would recommend everyone watch it. I mean, I think you described it right when you said it's the original Karen.
Mm-hmm. She absolutely is. She absolutely is the original Karen.
And she basically just milked her own children for her own payday.
Mm-hmm. It's really gross.
I remember there was very much a time, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, where you could not turn a TV or read a magazine that she wasn't in.
She was on the cover of tabloids and People, like, almost constantly.
Exactly. If you went to one of those supermarket tabloids, she was on the cover, I think, every day for about a good 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not including, I remember when she was on Dancing with the Stars and basically was doing any and everything she could to keep herself kind of in a public profile.
And she was even a behavioral problem on that show too. Yeah, I believe she was kicked off in like the 2nd round, and like her and her partner really clashed, and she didn't want to listen to the dance instructor and what he was teaching her, and it just seemed like an absolute mess. So this is her personality. This is how she interacts with people. She's very selfish and all about herself and the money. And the argument with this show always was, well, I need to make money to support my kids, which yeah, to some degree, but like this is child labor. Your kids are essentially paying for themselves, you know?
Well, and the kids were the meal ticket.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know,
And you can tell that even in the early documentaries that like she wanted to be famous. She wanted to make a payday out of, if this is what she was going to go through to carry these 6 babies and deliver them, like she wanted to get something out of it.
And unfortunately, when you give people like that any sort of juice or any sort of power, they're gonna go just off the wall with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what happened here.
And my other thought too is nobody reined her in. Like, did TLC execs not go to her and say, this is coming off abusive? Like, but again, it makes for good TV.
Well, and the other thing too is that by that point, it's, you've created a monster that you can't rein in.
Mm-hmm.
By this point, 2010, 2011, she's probably the most important person on the network.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
At that point.
If not, probably a tight race between her and the Duggars, but yeah.
But again, by this point now, the late 2000s, TLC's completely abandoned they're all in on reality. And then, down the road you'd have like, the Cake Boss and things like, Cake Boss, which was just very wholesome by comparison.
I know. Yeah. I didn't even include it. This wasn't Cake Boss was not problematic. No. At least not in this way.
We stand a Jersey Cake King.
We do. Yes, we do.
Unless there's a reason why he's problematic, in which case we don't. She's basically become too big to fail. Who at that point, who's going to rein her in? She knows what she is worth, and what executive at the network is going to be able to have the backbone to stand up to her.
They could have canceled the show.
They could have very easily canceled the show, but you have to remember too, when you're dealing with executives, especially in the media industry, you're dealing with a group of people that think that nothing in Hollywood would ever happen but for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're kind of left with is this really dumb power struggle between millionaires and a conceited person who wanted to be a millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a bunch of posturing for no reason.
Yeah. Colin is now in basic training in the Marines, and many have pointed out that he wouldn't have been able to enter the Marines with the psychiatric diagnoses that Kate said that he had. As for the other 4 sextuplets, no one knows much about them these days, and they're still living with their mom, and they don't really speak publicly, and they also don't speak to Colin and Hannah.
At this point, I think all the kids have earned their privacy.
Now, fortunately, unlike the Duggars, some money was set aside for the kids, although Kate has admitted to spending some of that money to care for the kids. The kids certainly earned that money, but again, like you said, like at what cost? Their family is divided. The kids are likely traumatized to some degree. And again, from very early in their lives, they never had a normal life. In terms of being a train wreck, or was TLC complicit here? I think, like 19 Kids and Counting, the show is both. I think they were complicit in promoting Kate's abusive behavior towards her husband and her kids. And again, how much were they involved in this plan to pretend that John and Kate were still married? What were the terms of John's lawsuit settlement? I want to know, did he get a ton of money to stay quiet for that? And he did. Once the 10-year gag order was up, he definitely talked a lot about his experience.
For his sake, I hope he had a good attorney.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he got a good chunk of change out of that for what he went through. So again, do they know anything about what happened to Colin? I guess they couldn't halt the show because he wasn't there, especially if Kate claimed medical reasons. And how long did TLC know that Kate was violating court orders about filming her children before they pulled the show? It's super messy. And I'm just glad that she's off TV and the kids have their privacy. And it seems like everybody's trying to heal and move on. Now, the next step is not one of my favorite shows, and we can get into why for a lot of reasons. But next up, we have the infamous show Toddlers and Tiaras. Now, this show premiered in 2009 and last aired in 2016. How it aired 7 years is beyond me. It followed young, mostly girls, and their moms as they participated in child beauty pageant circuits. A lot of the show was a behind the scenes perspective, showcasing the personal lives of the girls as well as their moms preparing for and performing in these pageants. There were so many layers of cringe to the show, as you can imagine. First, the girls were young and dressed provocatively, had mature hair and makeup done, wore these fake teeth called flippers, and they also performed these questionable routines in order to be judged on who was the prettiest. So I'm sure those girls developed insecurities very early on. The show captured bratty, spoiled kids, emotional meltdowns, extreme stage moms, and jealousy, sabotage, and fierce competitiveness. The girls were given pixie sticks and go-go juice in order to stay awake and perform on stage with energy. I find that absolutely borderline abusive, if not absolutely abusive. Now, certainly this show is a train wreck more than anything, and the premise alone is problematic, but I don't know. There's a spinoff of this show that would prove to be even more problematic. Do you know what I'm going to go into?
No, do I want to know?
Well, you're going to find out. So the spinoff was Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, featuring one of the most memorable beauty pageant contestants, Alana Thompson, better known as Honey Boo Boo. The show aired from 2012 to 2014, with the season of Lost episodes airing in 2017. The family dynamic and their life in Georgia was more of the focus of the show than Alana's participation in beauty pageants. The family, Mama June, Dad Sugar Bear, and sisters Anna, Lauren, and Jessica were also featured. Now, the show really amped up like the grossness, and there was a lot of like burping and farting and mud wrestling and Mama June's infamous forklift foot. Don't even ask it. Google it if you want to know. It's gross. The family was very redneck and proud of it. And while it seemed like producers amplified the gross behavior and essentially portrayed them as stupid, there were some really sweet family moments among them. It's there that things take a turn. And the show was abruptly canceled in 2014 when TLC found out that Mama June had allegedly begun dating a sex offender after breaking up with Sugar Bear towards the end of the show. Mama June apparently had also dated another sex offender prior to filming the show who had allegedly abused one of the older daughters. Now, Mama June and Sugar Bear briefly reunited for Marriage Boot Camp in 2015, and she returned to a new show, Mama June from Not to Hot, following her journey of weight loss and skin removal surgery in 2017. She then began dating a man named Gino, and they would both get arrested for drug possession, and Gino was additionally charged with domestic abuse. The fallout and the rocky relationships with her daughters would play out on TV in the following years, and as recently as earlier this year. The sister Lauren was awarded custody of Alana after June voluntarily gave up her rights. Alana and the sister have gained somewhat of a recent following by selling stuff on TikTok, and you can really see the profound emotional effect all of this has had on Alana. It's so sad. Again, same situation here. She was so young. She didn't know what this was, and it just kind of like catapulted her to fame. But in even a worse situation, because yes, while John and Kate had the abuse, like this really amped up things that the family likely wasn't, you know what I mean? And it was very embarrassing, I think, for them. And they obviously weren't as stupid and gross as the show portrayed them. Like that, I mean, even I watched, a couple episodes of the show, embarrassingly to admit, I did back then. And I remember just feeling the ick when watching it. Like this is wrong to show a family like this, because you could just tell, again, it was very scripted. It was very set up. Now, this was definitely a train wreck of a show that never even slowed down. And for so long, as mentioned, I feel like TLC made a mockery of this family more than any other show or any other family on TLC. Again, it's super embarrassing to watch, and I really think that they all deserved better. I also think that TLC was complicit in bringing back Mama June for her own show, when she continued this harmful behavior off camera that made for good storylines. They essentially used and exploited this family. And again, I question how much did they know about Mama June's behavior prior to and during the run of the show. What are your thoughts on that?
How is any of this real life?
It's so fucked up.
The levels of cringe and exploitativeness.
They really use them as like to laugh at them, you know, and have audiences laugh at them. And it's I mean, but at the same time, they agreed to it and they continued to do it. But again, I think they were desperate for money. And once they got a taste of the money and the fame, like they wanted to keep going regardless, you know?
It's just, it's, what are we doing here?
What are we doing?
What are we doing here?
Yeah, that's definitely, that was not a great one. All right. So moving on to the next one. Now this, I have to say, is really one of my guilty pleasures, one of my favorite shows. And I've kind of watched this family over the years, and they're actually still on today, and they are airing with a new season in a couple days. Premiering in 2010, Sister Wives follows a polygamous family, the Brown family, where patriarch Cody has 4 wives: Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin. They had 18 children among them. Now, the series starts off with Cody meeting and marrying his 4th wife, Robin. And throughout the years, the way that this relationship changed the family dynamic would do irreparable damage to them all. More on that in a moment. Prior to the show, there was a lot of drama with the 3, we call them OG wives, as they struggled to get along, live together, share their husband and household responsibilities. Money was very tight. They essentially lived in poverty and received government assistance, and at least 2 of the wives filed for bankruptcy. By the time the show started, the 3 OG wives were living in one house, but in separate apartments. Each wife had their own role, and by their account, all things seemed to have settled down by then, and the family ran relatively smoothly. One of the first major storylines followed the family coming out to the public as polygamist, and were subsequently under threat of investigation by the state of Utah. They certainly played up and dramatized the situation as they fled to Las Vegas. They were never charged with anything. As the seasons went on, more and more cracks in this family began to show. There was a major health emergency, a catfishing incident, a failed small business, and lots of moving. Over time, Robin and her kids, 3 of which were from a previous marriage and then later adopted by Cody, clearly became the favorite wife and children, as Cody spent much more time with them and gave them the most positive attention. Cody made little or no effort to work on relationships with his other wives and kids. And then when the COVID pandemic hit, as for a lot of families, it exacerbated any underlying issues and tensions that the family had. By season 17, Christine decided to leave the family, causing a lot of drama, but also a lot of good TV. Fans had long soured on Cody and Robin, and Christine became somewhat of a hero as fans cheered her on through her departure from the family and starting over a new relationship. And I 100% agree with that. It was almost very liberating to see Christine leave, and she's engaged now, if not married already. And she just seems a lot happier and lighter in interviews and in different things. So it's good to see that. Now, I do have to say, as many fans of the show who don't like Cody and Robin, I mean, Cody's his own thing. Like, he's very narcissistic. He's very patriarchal. It seems like he's got ADD. He can't focus on one thing. He's very selfish. But Robin is just, she plays the constant victim. She literally came in and had a hand in ruining this family. And she's a victim of it. Like, she doesn't take responsibility for anything that she does. She literally is like one of my most hated people on the face of this earth. But I digress. So more recently, Janelle and Mary announced their separation from Cody, leaving him in a monogamous relationship with Robin. The sad part of all this is the effect on the other kids that aren't Robin's. Some of them talk publicly about their strained relationship, if any, with their father, and the effect the more recent family dynamic has had on their lives. The upside is that Christine and Janelle maintain a close bond to each other, and most of the kids do as well to this day. A major problem with the show, much like the Duggars, is that it promotes this religion that's rife with abuse, poverty, welfare fraud, and misery for the wives and the kids. It's illegal in most states, and presumably because all of the harm that it brings to children in particular. Though the Browns have experienced some of those things prior to the show, the TV version of them isn't the typical polygamous family. They had more money than most polygamous families do because of their notoriety, and they even still had difficulty sustaining money to support a family of that size. It also doesn't help that Cody and Robin are terrible with money, but that's another story. Another problem is that they demonstrate that this lifestyle doesn't work. For 16 seasons, they defended and touted the perks of having sister wives, having that large family, help with raising their children and maintaining the household. And they all admitted to dealing with feelings of jealousy and resentment towards the other sister wives, but that their strength was that they could overcome those feelings. Well, clearly they didn't. Lastly, some people speculate that the show is fake and that the wives left Cody long ago. All reality TV is fake to some degree, but it's not certain that they would be able to keep that secret from the public for so long. It's possible, though. In terms of being complicit or a train wreck, on this one, I lean more train wreck, especially more recently. I think TLC promoting this illegal practice of polygamy that has numerous negative impacts speaks to the complicity in that. And the show itself proves that polygamy doesn't work. Like, marriage and raising kids is hard enough without extra wives and children and the dynamic and drama that goes along with that. While that is more of a realistic message now that it doesn't work, that's not what the show's intent was in the beginning. It's even more popular now that they're falling apart. And I, for one, I do feel vindicated because I think for me, I started watching the show when it first premiered and watched it for a couple seasons and then lost it for a bit. And then when I heard that the family was splitting up, I'm like, oh, well, I got to see this because I think I watched it because I didn't understand this lifestyle and how you can get past that jealousy and resentment. It can create a really toxic environment very quickly. You do see really tight bonds among the kids, which is really sweet to see that. And TLC also created a spinoff called Seeking Sister Wife and Brother Husbands, which do seem a bit more salacious.
If people want to be, I guess, ethically non-monogamous or want to be in open relationships, or I know people who are polyamorous. I mean, that's more power to them. If they've made it that conscious choice, then more power to them.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is different though. Do you feel the different vibes of this? It's very much based in like this religious belief that the more wives you have, the better you're going to do in heaven. And that's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. I know so much more about this than about reality television now in the last hour or so that I think I ever knew or maybe even wanted to know.
You're welcome. Like we said, we're going to choose topics that the other one didn't know a ton about. I know a lot about this one.
People want to see train wrecks.
Yeah. So you agree that this leans more train wreck because there wasn't a ton of complicity, at least the one compared to the first 2 shows or 3 shows, but yeah.
And they want to watch something that's going to make them, I guess, feel better about their lives.
That is one of my theories, as we'll get to later. I think that you're 100% right about that. Now, I do want to give some recommendations on the Sister Wives. So there is a Surviving Sister Wives podcast, really great. They do recaps. And as well as Shit Talk Sister Wives. That's a show on Patreon with Ace and Caitlin. If you are a fan of the show at all, you know them very well. They are hilarious. They are very trashy, and all their listeners love them. So have to give them a shout out. And then also on YouTube, My Take on Reality, and as well as Gwendolyn Brown, Cody, and Christine's Child do commentary videos for YouTube, and they're both very fascinating. So go check them out as well. Okay, guys, so we're going to leave it here today. Tom, any final thoughts on the shows we discussed today? How you feeling about TLC so far?
TLC is awful. Tune in next week to see how worse it gets.
All right. So next week we will be back with part 2. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at the Tell Me About Podcast, and email us episode suggestions and comments at the tellmeaboutpodcast@gmail.com. Have a good week, guys.
Have a good one, everybody.